my mind, and I don't know why I can't think straight or believe these little means at a time. I was never one to hide behind all of the blinking, flashing lights. So I wanna know, why do you still cross my mind? 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 As the weather gets colder, it's harder to breathe in the air. Or maybe I haven't tried hard enough. We live like we're older, but never take risks that could ruin our life. We're still smarter than them.
Good morning, everybody. It is the next day. I could not deal with yesterday, waking up at 4 a.m., flying 2 hours into the future, into a very cold, rainy environment. It was just the perfect weather to kind of relax and get refreshed for today. But it's 10:30 in the morning here. I ended up staying up way too late. Still unsure if I can talk about all the reasons why I'm out here, but one of the big reasons I'm out here is to kind of just have a different environment, to test the S5II out with the 16 to 28 millimeter. We have the S5II with phase detect autofocus. I'm very curious to see how it interacts with the third-party lenses in the L-mount alliance. See if everything's fixed. Will I be able to notice really a autofocus difference as far as video and photo goes with this lens? We'll find out. If not, this is great because this is a really small, affordable F2.8 wide-angle option for the L-mount, which is just great. It's always great to have one of those. It makes it easier to run and gun, makes it easier to have a lens that's just, you know, compact, not a lot of weight, and not a lot of money, but still getting really, really beautiful results. We're on the autofocus right now, and so as you see me shifting back and forth, the little box looks like it's catching my eye. The little software has always done a good job. We'll see if the lens can actually keep up. We have no more pulsing back there, ideally. But now that I've showered and got everything kind of packed and charged, let's go check out the city.
We won't break off, just take breaks here and there. But I'll wait up for you, let you catch up and hope you still need me, and that you'd never see. I live in fear, I believe you let me down. I barely believe in the signs I see, but I wanna know, why do you still cross my mind?
I end up in New York about once every 4 years, and the two things I do, and I know they're very touristy, but one is always come to Times Square at least once, because it's usually pretty accessible to where I'm staying, and I always just have to like get some random pizza somewhere, even if it's like not even that great, just for the risk that it might be really, really good. It's always very hit or miss, but it's just kind of like the overall vibe of this place. But the main reason I'm here is to test out the 16 to 28, how it's working with the new autofocus. From what I can tell on the back of the little LCD screen, it's working great. I can't tell the difference between that when I use the 50mm 1.8 that's native to this, and it's so good. The S5II really breathed life into these other lenses that were surrounding it and could mount onto it without an adapter, but just never seemed to work quite the same. And now all of a sudden we went from having like a pretty decent selection of like usable lenses to all of a sudden we have like 3 times as much just in one little like hardware update. So great. And now I'm going to run a series of just kind of walk tests and vlog tests to see how this guy holds up in all those situations. We'll see which focal lengths kind of give us wobbles in the corner. We'll see some of the benefits of maybe shooting faster frame rates with the crop and how that can minimize the wobbles. I do really like the 16 to 28 mil just because I am always thinking about like 4K 60, I'll have that crop. And so that turns the 16 to 28 more into like a 24 to 42 millimeter. Yes, 24 to 42 millimeter f2.8. APS-C crop, so not same field of view, but 24
The 42 millimeter is very, very usable. It's very much like that kind of like documentary run and gun. It's not quite 70, not quite that far, but it's still really good and compact overall. However, it's a 16 to 28, and even if there was a 16 to 35, my value structure of how I choose lenses have kind of changed. I'm all for cost-effective, quality to weight. I do not want my lower back to kill me. I don't want to be lugging around heavy stuff, and so I'll give up 35 millimeter for 28 if it saves me like half a pound or a pound for sure, which is kind of the overall beauty of this little setup here. But anyway, let's move on to the testing segment of this vlog.
We live like we're older, but never take risks. That could ruin our life. We're still smarter than them by a mile. Talk about it for a while. We won't break off. Just take breaks here and there, but I'll wait up for you. Let you catch up and hope you still need me, and that you'd never see. I live in fear. I believe you let me down. I barely believe in the signs I see, but I wanna know, why do you still cross my mind? 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 And it's hard to believe that you never see where you went.
This is going to be our vlog test in Cenima 4K. This is what it's going to look like whenever you have less control. So whenever I'm behind the camera, I have a lot more control over it, and so you know, it's going to look more stable just because of that, let alone the enhancements that they do in camera with the IBIS and the electronic. This is just with standard IBIS enabled. This is my arm fully extended, and this is at F2.8, so this is the bokeh you can kind of expect out of the thing. While at the same time too, if I walk around, it's impossible for me to really see in the little screen, but let me know. Walking not very like stable, kind of like just nonchalantly, not trying to do a little crab walk or anything that could make it a bit stable. But this is what it would look like, and like kind of some of the wobbling we might get when we're fully extended, just with less stability. This is just kind of how the look is whenever you have just all the IBIS turned off completely. I wonder if like we use no IBIS but just electronic image stabilization, what kind of results that would net. I will try that one next. All right, so now we have all the stabilization turned off except for the electronic, and so only the electronic stabilization is helping us out right now to do anything. And so I'm interested to see how that's going to look in comparison to just normal stabilization or stabilization in post. Because if this works with like no wobbles, but just kind of smoothing out all those jitters I'm getting from like stepping and not really paying attention and walking over like steps, then you know, that's gonna be cool. And so now I'm gonna shoot in Super 35 mode. This is at 60 frames a second, just because sometimes I don't want to have to really think about it. I would like to just shoot at 4K 60 everything, interpret what I need to interpret to 24 in post, and just have the option to slow down, or just not have to switch settings. Like keep kind of the exposure the same. See right now, because we've gone to 60 frames a second, it's kind of gotten a little darker. We've cropped in a little bit, but it'd be nice just to have one frame rate that was doing everything in some instances. That way I wouldn't really have to worry about necessarily going in and, oh, now it's wider and it's brighter and I have to re-expose every single time. You can just kind of be this like one thing. Now this is me with my arm fully extended. We have a 24 millimeter equivalent, so as you can see, it's not nearly as wide, and also extending your arm all the way out exerts a lot more effort, and it's actually harder to keep the camera stable. We have all the stabilization turned on, and so we'll have that kind of like helping us out. However, if I wanted to like bring it in a little more in where like my arm's bent and it's comfortable, it is a lot more just like on my face and a lot less, you know, inviting you into the environment. So I have a confession to make. Whenever I say I'm going to go back to the studio and review everything, I don't have one, so that just means wherever my laptop and camera is at the time, that is where I'm going to be reviewing stuff. Now, with that being said, having just taken a look at all the footage, I have to say I was really surprised if you go back and check how the 4K vlog test was at the full frame when we were at 16 millimeter, when we had just the electronic stabilization on, not even the IS boost, just the electronic stabilization. So no IBIS, no lens stabilization, just whatever software is going on in this camera that wants to smooth it out. That looked really good to me. It still kept some of the natural shake, which I kind of liked, but it didn't make it like too jarring. It got rid of just that like jitter that typically doesn't look as good, but it was much less distracting than just the wobbles. So I'm going to say if I'm going to be walking handheld with this, probably below, I'd say like 24 to 26 millimeter, I'm probably just going to use the electronic image stabilization or a gimbal. If I'm filming myself, I'm definitely just using the electronic image stabilization. Around 24 millimeter, all the wobbles seem to pretty much go away at that point. If you notice when I did the walking 4K 60 cropped in test or the vlogging 4K 60, because it does give us that 1.5 times crop, basically a 24 millimeter equivalent. That's about the point. You can still see a tiny bit of it, but that's about the point where nearly all of the wobbling goes away. I would suspect at 25 mil or 26 millimeter, we would have none at all. Looking back on this video, all the color you saw was basically just me filming in the standard log profile with a 709 LUT and a little bit of shadow and highlight tweaking so the shots looked more balanced. I really wanted you guys to see the natural color coming out of the S5II with the Sigma 16 to 28. So I really held back on doing any fancy grade on this particular project. But yeah, I was just overall really impressed with the results I'm getting out of this. I know I said a little earlier in the video, but the cost of this is a hyper wide angle zoom being a 16 to 28, having that 2.8 and just the weight versus like the sharpness, like there's really nothing else like there really out that fits this role, maybe aside from like the Tamron, but of course being on the Lumix S5II, the Sigma has a native L mount, so it just like it just works a little better than trying to adapt that Tamron. There's no real point. So my ending verdict for this lens is it's pretty much perfect for what it is. There's a little more focus breathing than I might want. I want a little more weather sealing, but at this price, at this weight, I wouldn't really expect anything more. All in all, I give this lens like a 9 out of 10, and I don't really think I'll be looking to replace it with anything anytime soon. The only 4 other lenses I considered getting over this one was the 16 to 35 f4. I've owned that lens before. I just get stuck where I don't really want just an f4, like I really want that 2.8. If I look at an alternative to that lens, unless I'm planning on adapting a 16 to 35 2.8 from Canon, which is giving me a longer barrel because the lens itself is actually bigger and I need that Sigma adapter, that coupled with the extra weight and then the less reliability in the autofocus department, don't really want to go that route. We could also look at the 14 to 28 2.8 Sigma Art lens. That lens is a little sharper. I've used that one before too. It's really great. However, it is massively heavy. The motor on that Sigma 14 to 28 as well is also a bit louder than this one, so the mic can kind of pick it up a little bit. Not to mention it's got the very bulbous element in the front, and though we get in 14 millimeter on the wide end, that is nice. To me, it's not really worth having to find a filter system for the front of the camera. I much prefer that this is something I can just put a step-up ring on and keep my 82 millimeter filters that I already have and just keep using it with it, not really skip a beat. Hi, Devin here from the Floor of Shame. I was exhausted when doing that last part, so my words were kind of all jumbled, my brain was scattered. But there was a 4th lens I meant to mention, and that was the 18 millimeter 1.8. And I really wanted to do that lens. The problem with it is, as beautiful as it is, and it's actually wide enough for vlogging, for real estate, I really tend to want 16 as my minimum, and then having just an 18 millimeter prime is just really awkward. I used it for a tad bit, and it's great. It's great. It's like great for what it is, but just having to switch it as often is just not the style of shooting I'm doing these days. I just want to have one or two lenses to switch through that can cover 90% to 99% of the work, rather than having to worry about switching every time I just want a slightly different look. That lens is amazing. I'd love to have it, but that's just wasn't in the cards for me. I'm trying to do a like 1-2 done combo at the moment, and it's probably going to consist of more of like a 16-28 and a 50mm prime, not a 18mm prime and a 28-70. I considered it, don't get me wrong, considered it. I just felt like I'd be losing a little too much on the wide end. Those 2mm on the wide end matter so much. I mean, even 14-16 is like a huge difference. It's like 25% more in the frame. So yeah, sorry I left that out, but this is me fixing that later. And so being that those are really the only other 4 options I could kind of like consider getting that would have autofocus, have that 16mm on the wide end and a really decent zoom to the mid-range, this one's the best, hands down. The best cost-wise compared to any of those ones I just talked about. Maybe you can get that 16-35 Canon EF a little cheaper, but with the adapter it ends up not being as much cheaper, and the other trade-offs just aren't worth it. But just straight up brand new, something that's kind of modern and made for today's cameras, not having to be adapted, this 9 out of 10, like really 10 out of 10. There's nothing better than it that really beats it in my opinion. And so with that being said, if you want to pick one up, I'll put the link in the description below. They also have this on Sony E-mount, so if you're in the Sony world, I know the autofocus works really good with that camera as well. And so the L-mount or the E-mount version, both would be stellar, especially on those smaller bodies if you're trying to just keep your weight down. Outside of a couple of the intro shots, just because I forgot to turn it on, I'm so used to having it in manual, had to get used to keeping the Lumix camera in autofocus mode. Everything you saw was shot in autofocus. So even those tracking shots where you see me walking down the hall and then walking away where my leg kind of does the transition, go look at that shot because it's really impressive that it like pulled focus really naturally from when I'm walking to the back to when I was up to it. And then the shot coming out the other end, it was focused on my leg and then really naturally kind of like tracked me back outward. It wasn't really jarring, and even the focus breathing didn't really mess with me too much because of the other stuff that was kind of going on in the frame. But that's going to be it for this video. Leave a comment down below letting me know if you're going to pick up this lens and what you thought of the footage. Hit the like button if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully I can start making more of these. I'm optimistic. I feel pretty good about it. That's it. Later.
You still need me, and that you'd never see. I live in fear. I believe you let me down. I barely believe in the signs I see, but I wanna know why do you still cross my mind?